the attention is going to be drawn to the guys at the top of the class because those are the guys that you would assume are your most likely to make an instant impact on the roster. But these are the names that I think stand out the most as the freshmen that we want to watch here going into spring practices. And we're a few weeks away from spring practices officially beginning here at Mississippi State. But once that happens, who are we hoping to see stand out? Once the spring game comes along, who are we hoping to see stand out, have a big performance? And you got to start with the top dog in the class, that being Bralan Womack. Obviously, I guess officially ended as a 4-star signee, which I know he dealt with some injury stuff, and I'm sure there's justifications for the rating dropping, but that's very Mississippi State on brand that officially he ends as a 4-star prospect, even though he was a 5-star when he signed with the Bulldogs out of Brandon, Hartfield Academy. But, I mean, one of the top signees State has had in several years, and a guy who is a big-time talent at a position where the State's obviously had some great safeties over the years, but the type of guy you think has the opportunity to step in and contribute right away. We've talked about this a lot with Mississippi State's safety room. That this is kind of perfect timing for Bralan Womack to be able to step in and have an opportunity to play a big role right away, because you're losing so many guys out of that safety room. So many of your top players in that group run out of eligibility. You had a very veteran group there, and then you lost more guys to the transfer portal as well. Guys, I don't know how much they really would have played, but you still took some losses there. So, I mean, look, Jerron Manning obviously was a big-time player for you this past season. Brian Lanier, who I thought had a solid season. Hunter Washington, opinions on him be what they are, a guy who played a lot for you at that spot. And then, look, Tony Mitchell played quite a bit for State at safety as well. And obviously he transfers out. So of your top 5 safeties from a season ago, Isaac Smith is the only one returning. Now, if you're only going to have one guy returning, that's a pretty dang good one to have back. Isaac Smith been such a good player for State and someone that I'm really excited to see him as a senior within the Zach Arnett defense. I think he's going to have a really big year. But there's open opportunities. And obviously State hit the portal hard, right? You bring in Jordan Gilbert, Kendall Dolby, Marcus Williams. Those are all guys who you expect to be sort of your leaders alongside Isaac Smith at the position. But Womack's got the talent to be a guy that plays right away. He's got the talent to be a guy that can potentially end up taking a starting job from any one of those guys. Someone that has been talked a lot about, mostly played sort of as a middle-of-the-field player at Hartfield Academy, but can be used in a variety of roles. You could get him involved more as a box safety, get him down as a tackler. You can play him as a true nickel and put him in more one-on-one coverage type situations and develop him as a nickel corner. Has the athleticism to do that, played wide receiver, and was a very effective receiver at the high school level. A good return man, at least when it comes to interception returns, was able to make big plays off of that, which that's kind of where, if you're talking about, the middle of the field safety, a guy who's going to have those opportunities, go up and get the ball and make a play. Womack is a special talent and someone that, again, has the opportunity because of out of necessity to play a big role right away. So you want to see what that looks like when he comes into the spring. Is he able to step in as a true freshman and make it clear, oh yeah, this is one of the top dogs in the room? I think that would be a big thing for State early on. If you have a true freshman step in that secondary and a showing in the spring, I mean, this guy's going to be hard to keep off the field. That's a lot of reason for excitement. So Bralan Womack, easily the top guy in the spring that State wants to be able to see. I'll stay on the defensive side of the ball, and I mean, it's got to be Micah Nickerson, right? This Sam linebacker. State's got him listed as a Jack right now on the roster. Zach Arnett does not use Jack. They call it a Sam. Out of South Pike, obviously one of the big recruiting wins for State in the class. None is bigger than Womack, right? That you're able to win that battle, get the flip from Auburn, hold off Texas A&M's pursuit. But with Nickerson, that to have been a guy that you kind of, I don't want to say discovered him because he had some offers, but you had the commitment from him, and it felt like, hey, man, this guy's really under the radar. Flips to Missouri, and then right before signing day, you get him back in the class, and you worked to make that happen. And I know there's been talk that, hey, man, State had to step up NIL-wise, and they made sure they did what they had to go get him. And, I just rolled my eyes at Bralan Womack as this guy was advertised as a 5-star. He signed with State, now he's a 4-star. We have to give credit where it goes the other way. Micah Nickerson, when it was all said and done, Rivals had him as a top 50 player in the country, as a big-time signee, high 4-star for the Bulldogs. And this is a guy who is just a super athletic, explosive pass rusher off the edge, something Mississippi State has desperately needed and has lacked significantly over these past few years. State's not had a big-time edge rusher since probably 2022. Tyra Sweet was a really good player in that role. Since then, you've not had anybody step up across multiple defenses, defensive coordinators, guys who you thought could step into the role. It hasn't happened. Last year, I would say that Malik Silla showed flashes and had moments where you saw a little bit of that, but you never got it consistently out of him. I think he only finished with like 1.5 sacks on the season when it was all said and done, despite being able to get some pressures throughout the year. You need guys who can be those pass rushers. That's been part of the problem for State secondary at times, is you just can't get pressure on the quarterback consistently. Nickerson is a guy that's got that type of a skill set, and a guy that you think has the opportunity to step in and be a big-time player and get after the QB. And even if you're purely talking about him as a third-down pass rush specialist, that's someone who could make an impact as a true freshman. And similar to what we're talking about with Womack in terms of early opportunities, there's an early opportunity at State because of positional need. We hit on this a lot that and Trey Clark asking, is he an early enrollee? Yes. I believe he's here for the spring. I believe he actually was a part of bowl practices, if I remember correctly. But he is on the roster for the spring. I mean, all the guys we're going to hit on the roster for the spring. There's like a couple other names I probably would have gotten into, but they're not going to get here till the summer. So these are all guys that should be good to go throughout spring practices. But we talked about that edge position. State only went out and brought one guy in Amari Williams, who clearly Zach Arnett thinks very highly of. They think he's a special player. We got to steal there. That's a great get for us. Obviously, though, that's a risk. You don't know what you're getting there. A guy who has not done it yet to this point. And I guess Nickerson has not done it either because he's not been in college. But the talent profile is there of a guy who could be a really big-time player and have the opportunity to contribute right away, because even if Amari Williams ends up being a good player for State, that's the thing. You can't just have one guy. You got to be able to rotate bodies. Let's say State hits on Amari Williams. He's an outstanding pass rusher. What else do they have at that spot? Tyshawn Willis kind of had a little bit of this billing coming last year, not to the same extent as Nickerson when it was all said and done. Willis didn't play as a true freshman. A guy that had to take a year. And I'm wondering, this is not reporting, I'm wondering if there was an injury thing with him, because didn't even appear in any games, whereas typically if you're a red shirt, these days you're at least going to get in 4 games. I think at the bowl game, like he was may have been there, but may have just not been dressed out. I don't know for sure, but usually you would have at least seen some snaps, and you didn't get that out of him. Not going to write him off or anything, but we haven't seen it yet. Outside of that, where else do you go on the roster? You really don't. I think LaKendrick James is a guy that's kind of got the frame that it might make sense. I know there's been talk about guys like Darian Gillette maybe making that move. You just don't have anybody proven at that spot. So even if you hit on Amari Williams, who's backing him up? Who's in that rotation? Nickerson has that opportunity. Now, the big talk with him is that he was very light coming out of high school, that he was listed around 215. I will say State's got him on the roster right now at 250. I wonder if someone misheard and they heard he's 250 as when somebody said he was 215. I don't know that. I have a hard time believing he's put on 35 pounds of weight between signing day and now, which, to be fair, the weight that he was listed at would have been, I guess, from his early season weight. So perhaps he was able to bulk up. Guys don't really put on weight during the season, but maybe it's feasible that the original weight was off base and he's been able to put on some more weight. And look, that's going to be the big thing to watch. And that'll be a huge thing to watch for in the spring. Obviously, they're not going through the summer workout period that a lot of these guys are going to go to, where you're really seeing the bulking. But by being on campus, he's getting into a college weight room and getting those opportunities to bulk up and get bigger and stronger. So what does he look like when we see him in the spring? Does he look like a guy that's 215 pounds out there, or does he have some mass behind him and you trust putting him on the field? And to be perfectly clear, even if he ends up, I would imagine he's going to put on 5 to 10 pounds of weight at a minimum. He probably puts on more. Even if we're talking about a guy that's under 230. David Bailey for Texas Tech was one of the top pass rushers in the country. And I believe at the Senior Bowl, he weighed in at like 220-something pounds. If I'm off on that, I apologize. I guess David Bailey would have been today, as we're recording, would have gotten his measurements at the combine. So I'm curious what he weighed in at the combine from a weight standpoint. I know he ran a 4.51. That's great. Do they not have his? He's at 251. So yeah, he's put on some weight. Because I believe at the combine, the Senior Bowl rather, they were saying he was pretty light. Regardless, you can also go back to freshman year Harold Perkins at LSU, where Harold Perkins was around 220-ish, 215, 220-ish, and was a terror rushing off the edge. Now, that was solely the role he was used in. They couldn't really play Harold in any other spots. And you can't on a down-by-down basis have a guy like that on the field. That's been the Harold Perkins conundrum at LSU. I think I've explained it a few times on the show. A lot of it's like, how on earth did Brian Kelly waste that guy? I think that's the fan base narrative or college, like just sports fan narrative. When part of it is he wanted to play off-ball linebacker. He wanted to be a true linebacker and not an edge. That's part of it. But even if they had put him at edge, having a guy who's setting the edge at 220 pounds consistently down after down is a problem because teams are just going to run at you. And that was the issue for Harold Perkins did have as a freshman that kind of got overlooked is teams would run at him and he didn't handle it well. You got to be able to set the edge, which is another issue State has had at that spot. You can't be a down-by-down player if you can't do that. But as a true freshman, as a rotational guy, can you come in on third and passing down? Yeah, you can. Where it's your role, pin your ear back, get the quarterback. Sometimes that's all you got to do. I remember a few years back, a guy that, I don't ultimately know how things turned out with his career, but remember Don Terry Russell for State, Devontae's younger brother? Kind of a similar type frame, but just sort of long and lanky, but really athletic rushing off the edge. You got some opportunities that year where State put him in for a few snaps and told him, hey, man, just go get the quarterback. And he showed more potential in that than anybody else State had as an edge rusher. Now, did he ever get his weight up to a point where he could have been a down-by-down player? I don't know. And I obviously didn't even play in 2024, ends up transferring out of the program. Don't really know what happened there. But Nickerson is going to have an opportunity to contribute right away because State needs guys who can get after a quarterback. I know I think the overall opinion probably needs a year to get his body right, and maybe that's the case, and maybe State isn't going to want to burn the red shirt. But look, man, if he shows some flashes in the spring that he's a guy that can create pressure, then he goes through summer and can bulk up more, I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field.